Head to the courts now. President Cyril Ramaphosa won his urgent interdict application to stop the former president going ahead with a private prosecution against him. Zuma holds the president should have launched an investigation to probe his allegation that advocate Billy Downer, the state prosecutor in Zuma's arms deal corruption case, leaked private medical information to Karen Maughan. Well, let's speak now to constitutional jurist Professor Koos Malan. Professor, thank you so much for joining us. So, when we spoke last week, you did believe that the former President Zuma had very little chance of succeeding, and indeed we see that this urgent interdict has been granted. I wonder if you can break it down exactly what the court decided today.
Yeah, in a nutshell, it boils down to the following. Whenever a person wants to institute a private prosecution, in this case, Mr. Zuma wanting to institute a private prosecution against three people. First, advocate Billy Downer, the prosecutor in his case, in Mr. Zuma's criminal case. Ms. Karen Maughan, who is a journalist, and Mr. Ramaphosa himself. Mr. Zuma alleges that the prosecutor and Ms. Maughan caused personal information, more specifically information regarding his medical record, to be made public. And then he also alleges that the president somehow, and I don't know precisely how, I say somehow, actually assisted the two others, the two first mentioned persons, in perpetrating this offence. And for that reason, he does not only want the first two to be prosecuted, but also Mr. Ramaphosa. Now, in order for a prosecution to take place, in the first place, it's always the state that institutes the prosecution. But in this case, the prosecutorial authority issued a noli prosequi certificate. That is a certificate saying we are not prepared to prosecute Ms. Maughan and Mr. Downer. That is a prerequisite for a private prosecutor, in this case Mr. Zuma, to institute the prosecution. But now Mr. Zuma, on the basis of the noli prosequi certificates that were issued in relation to Downer and Maughan, also contends that he can actually also institute a prosecution against Mr. Zuma, against Mr. Ramaphosa. Now, in a nutshell, what the court has decided was that it appears from all the evidence available at this stage that there is no clear indication that the noli prosequi certificates that were issued in relation to the first two also pertains to Mr. Ramaphosa, as a result of which there is no reason, no basis for prosecuting Mr. Ramaphosa at that stage. Right. Now, the criminal case in which Mr. Ramaphosa was required to appear was scheduled for forthcoming Thursday, that is the 19th. Now, what Mr. Ramaphosa has asked for were basically two things. First, please excuse me from appearing in the court, pending, in the second place, the hearing of the case on the merit whether or not I should be prosecuted at all, altogether, in this particular case. Now, what the court decided today only related to the first question, namely whether there's any basis for dragging Mr. Ramaphosa before a court on the 19th. Now, what the court has now decided, that there is in fact no such basis, that if Mr. Ramaphosa is required to appear before a court, that would actually violate his right to freedom, which is quite obvious because he cannot decide as he pleases where he wants to go and what he wants to attend, because he has to attend this hearing. So that is clearly a violation of his right to freedom, which is a common law and a constitutional right. Why? Well, because there is ample evidence, ample indication, according to the judgment of the court today, that there is in fact no basis for continuing with this private prosecution against Mr. Ramaphosa. Although we should say the following, what the court also said, I now grant an interim interdict. That is a preliminary interdict, if one wants to explain it in that way, so that nothing proceeds at this stage. But at a later stage, to be established by the office of the Deputy Judge President in cooperation with the two parties in this matter. The full merits of the case as to whether there is any basis for prosecuting Mr. Ramaphosa will be argued before the court at a later stage, perhaps in a month or 2 or 3. But for the moment, there is no basis, there's no reason for Mr. Ramaphosa to appear before court. The interim interdict was granted. He was successful in this application, and the next step now is, as I've said, for the parties to approach the office of the Deputy Judge President in order for a date to be fixed for the case to be finally argued, heard, and adjudicated on the merits.
All right. So thank you. You've explained it really well. So Thursday's not happening. And the second part of it was, that President Ramaphosa's argument is, I don't want Thursday to happen because I'm actually challenging the entire merit of this case. And
Yes.
What was said today is it doesn't look like there's much merit for this case, but it still has to be fully explored at a later date. So the president is not fully off the hook. Is that right? I mean, there is more still to come.
That is, I think, quite a good summary of the matter. At this stage, in other words, when an interim interdict is heard, the criterion, the evidential criterion is, so to say, in layperson's terms, does it appear that the president have a case? That's prima facie. If prima facie it appears it has a case, he must be successful. But eventually, the case also has to be heard fully on the merits, as there is on the basis of a different, and that's a higher yardstick in that particular case. In that case, he must indicate essentially on a balance of probabilities that there should not be any prosecution against him, but that can only be decided on once the case is on the private prosecution as such is fully heard, which will, as I've said, take place at a later stage. At this stage, we don't know when, but clearly the indications from what the judge has said, Judge Sutherland, together with the two other judges, said is that it is regarded as a matter that has to be decided expeditiously, and I think for that reason it is a matter that should be finally disposed of, I think, within the next 2 months or so.
All right, thank you so much for breaking that down for us, because really it's just getting more and more confusing. Constitutional jurist Professor Koos Malan explaining there will be no court case, private prosecution case for President Ramaphosa on Thursday. It does look like former President Jacob Zuma's chances of attempting to privately prosecute